is a common myth that has been debunked, but too many people still believe. Story 1: popping your knuckles is actually harmless, and the study that claimed it caused arthritis was heavily flawed. Studies now show that it has nothing to do with causing arthritis. Edit fixed a typo. Story 2: lemmings aren't suicidal. They were filming a Disney nature documentary where the producers herded them off cliffs, and the misconception stuck. It's been debunked, but you ask someone about lemmings and see what they say. Story 3: that if you get too close to a baby, the mother will smell human on the baby and abandon the nest. You probably should still avoid touching baby birds for other reasons like disease or risking injury to the animal, though since I'm already on the topic of animal myths. Another common myth is that daddy long-leg is the most venomous spider in the world, but it can't bite you because its fangs are too tiny. This myth is wrong on both accounts. They do have venom, but it's essentially harmless to humans, and they can bite you. The pain just typically isn't as severe as something like a brown recluse. Edit to clear up a lot of confusion, the term daddy long leg can mean something different in different parts of the world. There are 3 creatures that commonly go by the name the crane fly, the harvestman, and the house spider. Story 4: not turning your airplane mode on smartphone interfere jam communications. Do you really think if a smartphone might endanger a whole plane with passengers they would let it fly? Story 5: that the Coriolis effect has any relevant bearing on how water drains from a sink, a bathtub, or especially a toilet. I was actually taught this by a teacher. The design of toilets direct water in a specific way. The Coriolis effect would never change that. But even in more passive drainage systems, the internal flow of water and geometry of the basin will be much more significant than that of the Coriolis effect. This is true even if water sits still for long periods of time. Under very specific scientific conditions, with a flat, perfectly circular pan and a centralized drainage hole, many days after filling the water, the Coriolis effect can begin to govern the direction of the water as it's emptied. But this is not exactly practical. We do see the effect in weather patterns, of course, though, so that's something. TLDR: the Simpsons episode in Australia lied to everyone. Story 6: not sure if it counts as a myth that's been debunked, but people who misunderstand average life expectancy. When you hear that the average life expectancy was 40 a couple hundred years ago, it's not that people would only live to 40, but that half the population was dying in infancy and the other half living to 80. Obviously, I'm exaggerating these ratios to make a point. Edit a word. Story 7: bumblebees shouldn't be able to fly, except they obviously can. I think bumblebees perfectly exemplify the fundamental misunderstanding that laypeople have of the scientific process and the difference between a law and a theory. A scientific law is a physical description of what we observe under specific circumstances. A theory, on the other hand, explains why we observe different phenomena when at least one variable isn't controlled for. So, it isn't that bumblebees shouldn't be able to fly. It's that they fly as a result of a different set of variables within the mechanisms of flight. Story 8: height dominance in parrots is not a thing. They will not want to show dominance over you. Just because their cage is eye level, birds just like being high up. The reason you don't want a big on your shoulder is because you don't want that big beak near your eyes if it becomes startled. Story 9: you shouldn't go swimming shortly after eating. There's no reason that should be dangerous. However, swimming after drinking alcohol puts you at a substantially higher risk of drowning. Story 10: you must wait 24 hours before reporting a missing person. Some questions. 1. 24 hours from when? The time you realize they were missing, the time you estimate they went missing, the time of the initial report to police. 2. Who is the legal timekeeper? If this is a law, it must have a designated timekeeper for official records. City police? County sheriff? Do I hire a private attorney to file a timekeeping motion in court? 3. If the most likely time to find a missing person is the first 24 hours, why would you wait 24 hours for? If the person dies or is severely injured because the county-state refused to initiate a search, doesn't that put some liability on their office? It seems like that would have been tested in court by now. There's no law governing how long you have to wait before notifying the police of a missing person. It's nonsense. File a report as soon as you suspect the person is missing or in danger. Do you know how many wellness checks officers go on in a day? Call it in, man. Edit before I forget. The police are also under no obligation to do anything but carry out the will of the court. Story 11: you don't get a cold from being outside when it's cold. Edit. Yes, you smart-ass dorks. I know there's a connection between cold weather and your immune system. My statement still stands because the correlation is not nearly as strong as people think. It's essentially negligible unless you're a weakling who's never gone outside or taken a vitamin in their life. Story 12, the vaccine autism link, debunked decades ago. The sole proponent lost his medical license over it. Yet every anti-vax mom apparently knows someone whose friend's cousin has a child who turned autistic after the measles vaccine, and somehow not a single one has met this alleged autistic child. But the story is, of course, 100% true, and vaccines are terrible. Story 13, Russians use pencils in space. I think originally it was a joke about how the USA spent so much money on developing a zero-G pen that could write upside down without leaking all over the place, but the USSR just sent their men up with pencils. Now I knew this was unlikely, as the shavings from a regular pencil would go everywhere. I remember emptying the classroom grinder as a messy chore, and I think every backpack I owned from first grade on had a fine dust of hand flake shavings at the bottom. But I also know from art supplies that there's a peel-away paper style of pencil or mechanical pencil, often with wax lead. So I thought maybe that's what they used. Nope. I am turning 40 next month, and someone finally told me I was wrong. Did you know that a myth? Yeah, they also had to do zero-G pen research. I countered with the paper peel or mechanical pencil idea. It's not the shavings. That fine graphite dust would be on electronics as an electrical conductor, and there would be no way to control it. They made pens too. I don't know about wax pencils. Might be too cold up there at times. So, I knew there had to be more to the story, but for over 13 of my life, I believed a joke relayed to me as truth from my father, now retired engineer at Lockheed Missile Space, about the budget savings of the USSR. It has made me question a lot of facts I took for granted because Dad is smart, and he said, Story 14, I don't know if this is specifically a myth, but the bald eagle squawk is actually so pathetic most eagle squawks have a hawk's dubbed over in movies and such. Story 15, that handling a baby will make the mother reject it. Because it smells you on the baby, most birds don't have a significant sense of smell. So put the naked baby back in the nest. Now, sometimes mother birds will push a sick or otherwise terminal chick out of the nest. So when people try to put it back, she goes, hey, thought I got rid of you, and does it again, but that's not because of you. She just knows something you don't. So take that babe to a rehab rescue and hope for the best. But a lot of the time, the little squishy beans just wiggle out of the nest. So feel free to put them back in. No harm done. Oh, also, carrots don't help your eyes' night vision. That was made up by the Brits to mask the fact they had developed radar during the war. Story 16, that cats kill babies. I've run into this so many times since having kids. And it's not the older grandmas making these statements. I've had 20-year-olds tell me that you can't have cats if you plan to have babies because they'll steal their breath or some other variation. No amount of reasoning or rationale will dissuade them of this belief. Story 17, the medical show thing, where they use defibrillators when a guy flatlines. That's not true. When a guy flatlines, he's dead. Defibrillators don't restart hearts. Story 18, that peasants in the Middle Ages were all illiterate. The study that influenced the idea determined literacy by the prevalence of books written in Latin, which only the upper class knew. Most peasants could actually read and write in their own language. I recommend some of the people reading this go watch Shadiversity's video on the topic, as it does a very good job explaining it. Story 19, that your hair and fingernails still grow after you die. It's mainly an optical illusion. Your skin decays and shrinks, causing hair and fingernails to look like they've grown. Story 20, that typing in your PIN number backwards at an ATM machine will summon the police. Please don't do this and aggravate your attacker. Just give them the 500. Story 21, that Ted Bundy in real life, prior to the media whoring of his trial, was some kind of slayer who had tons of dating success with various women and got victims by charming them. Story 22, the guy who observed wolves and concluded that dogs follow a similar alpha pack mentality, spent rest of his life trying to undo it, but it already took hold. Story 23, QAnon. Literally all of it was just an internet troll making sure up. If you believe anything QAnon said, even after this revelation, I have bad news for you. Story 24, wage gap. It only applies when you look at all men versus all women. When you break it down job by job and compare people with the same qualifications and experience, it disappears. When women start taking on the high-paying, dirty, and dangerous jobs, think your coal miners, your plumbers, your roofers, your farm hands, your bricklayers, your sanitation engineers, your road workers, your oil rig workers, and to a much lesser extent your STEM-related jobs. Only then will the broadly applied wage gap disappear. And it will take time to encourage women into those unpleasant, back-breaking jobs that are necessary for society to keep running smoothly. But there's progress happening, but the money is there and waiting for anyone willing to do them. Edit forgot to mention that men also work 39 hours to every 32 hours worked by women. That alone accounts for the bulk of the pay gap. Story 25, my mom thinks that because I shave my face, it'll grow a beard. Shaving doesn't actually make the hair grow back thicker or darker. It ends up just the same. ETA, I'm a girl with blonde body hair. I use an eyebrow razor for the really short hair all over my face. I've been doing it for a while now, once every couple of weeks, and the one time I let it grow back, it looked the same as before I ever touched it. Story 26, there's the stupid ones like the autism and the vaccines myths that should never have been believed in the first place, especially with the shoddy research around it. Then there's the ones that you can understand, like wolf packs do not have alphas like what was believed and published for a long time. The concept is still used a lot today in pop culture. Even the guy who wrote the paper talking about alphas and wolf packs backtrack years later after new research came out putting his findings in doubt. Story 27, that women's hymens are barriers or seals that break or tear and bleed when the woman first has. The hymen is not always a barrier. It's a membrane that surrounds part of the vagina, and it should normally not be ripping in any way the first time you have, nor should any part of you. The idea that it happens to every woman, just a myth that stems from the belief that women are somehow changed or become less valuable when they begin having. If intercourse is at all painful, or it's sometimes because you're not lubricated well enough. It can be normal to bleed during your first time, though, not for all women, obviously. Everyone is different. Some women do bleed during their first time. That's normal. And yes, tearing is possible, although not for everyone. I'm just saying that the idea that all women have some sort of tamper-evident seal that pops and bleeds during their first time isn't true. Story 28, tryptophan doesn't actually make you sleepy. The reason you always feel tired after a Thanksgiving meal is because your body is spending all its energy digesting your big meal. Story 29, that a woman is supposed to bleed when she loses her virginity, that vaginas become loose the more partners a woman has. Does your butthole become looser with each turd it passes? The vagina is a muscle in the same way. Stop it, edit okay, but has a sphincter which is not exactly the same. Which analogy do you prefer? Does your mouth become looser after you eat a big sandwich? Is that better? Edit 2, the vagina is as much a sphincter as the mouth. It's not one round muscle, but several muscles that more or less form around the point. It's a muscle and acts as such. Story 30, your blood. Is not blue. Seriously though, I was told that everyone's blood was blue on the inside when I was younger, and I honestly don't know why my mom thought that. Maybe it's just one of those things that you only believe because your family's been saying it since your grandma's grandpa's grandma's grandma's grandpa, or something like that. Story 31, that the Emperor Constantine picked the canon of the Bible at the Council of Nicaea. The truth is, not only did Constantine have absolutely nothing to do with the canon of the Bible, neither was the canon even discussed at the Council of Nicaea, let alone decided. I don't know where this myth comes from, but so many people seem to believe it, and it shows no sign of dying out. Story 32, I'm not sure this counts as a myth, but it's something that nags at me whenever I see the meme that everyone's skull looks the same. You can take someone's skull and, unless there is severe damage because determine their age, race, and I think in some instances, even if they use certain controlled substances, though that wasn't something I ever got confirmed in my forensic science class. Story 33, the War of the Worlds broadcast in 1938. We all know the story. Orson Welles broadcasted War of the Worlds over the Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS. But people only tuned in partway through and heard the radio announcing that machines were landing in the country and were advancing and attacking. People panicked in the streets and thought aliens really were invading. There was hysteria on the streets. People were looting and traffic jams banked up as people tried to escape, but it turns out that isn't really true. It turns out barely anyone actually listened to the broadcast, and the few that were listening knew it was Orson Welles and knew it was just a broadcasting of War of the Worlds. If there was anyone that did tune in and mishear it and panicked, it was nowhere near the hundreds and thousands that have been reported in this myth. Story 34, that human beings were once short. This is actually true. Humans are, on average, taller now than at any point in history. But human height varies based on nutrition. Both modern and medieval Europeans were taller than Georgian-era Europeans, for example. But at no point in modern history, the last 10,000 years, were humans hobbit-sized, as many people seem to believe. What really cracks me up about it is that there are so many ways people mess this up. Thomas Jefferson built his bed into the wall of his home this way. He could roll off the bed to his right to go to his library, or roll to his left to wash up and get ready for the day. He, like most Westerners, also believed in the miasma theory of disease, which says that diseases are caused by bad air. In Jefferson's day, it was a fad amongst the American upper classes to sleep sitting up as far from the bad air as possible. So Jefferson's bed is only like 55. I've repeatedly heard people look at the bed and say, wow, he was so short. I guess people were small back then, even though there are dozens of contemporary references to Jefferson being 62. I went to the Fashion Museum, Bath on a trip to England. I was looking at a display case of late 1700s women's shoes when a mom and young daughter walked up. The girl was like, those shoes are so small, mummy. To which mom said, people used to be much smaller, sweetie. I had read the information card next to the case, and so I was like, actually, it says here that these are samples shoemakers used to put in their shop windows. That's why there's only one type of each shoe, and that's why they're so small. Why bother making two full-size shoes if you just want to show what the finished product looks like? Mom shot me daggers. The Art Institute of Chicago had one of Henry VIII's suits of armor. Some kid commented on it, and his dad said, well, it's small because people used to be short, son. I had to pipe up, well, it says here the armor was made in 1503, which would have made Henry VIII 12 years old. So that's why it's so small. Also, suits like this are more likely to survive, since Henry didn't joust or go into battle when he was 12. I was once at a museum that had an 1870s U.S. cavalry soldier's uniform on display. Once again, a parent told their kid that it was small because people were so much smaller in the 1870s than today. I had to point out that once modern rifles were invented, brute strength wasn't something needed in cavalry soldiers. So it made sense to recruit smaller guys so as not to wear out the horses. After all, a horse can carry 150 pounds. Man much farther than a 300 pounds. Man, cue blank stares from the dad. Story 35, the myth. When it comes to art, there is no such thing as natural talent. It's 100 hard work and practice. There are people whose first drawings are literally photorealistic using only a Bic pen. So that's bullshit. Secondary is the idea that hard work and practice are the only thing that separates bad and good artists. We're perfectly accepting of people who say they're bad at math or science. But if you say you're bad at artistic pursuits, then it's all ick, maybe try harder or quit. I'm salty because I literally got told to quit making art by an artist that a lot of people in the community look up to. Story 36, vaccines cause autism. Any of you who try to argue with your Google medical degree, vaccines cause autism, it was literally debunked by the person who originally proved it with falsified data. Story 37, that glass is a super cooled liquid that is perpetual flowing down. As proof, they show medieval window glass that's thicker at the base and thinner on top. Explain over the centuries it flowed down, but that is actually all a myth and bogus. I think this is caused because medieval glass making techniques were imperfect, and they usually put the thicker parts down in order to increase stability. Story 38, that vaccines cause autism or cancer or any other incurable disease. Granted, some people react to them due to allergies or sensitivities or whatever, but the numbers of that are low. Also, is autism that much worse compared to the bubonic plague, pertussis, or polio? I guess I'd rather be autistic than lose a leg or have my lungs turn to mush, but that's just me. Story 39, that the Earth is flat. By around 500 BC, most ancient Greeks believed that Earth was round, not flat. But they had no idea how big the planet is until about 240 BC, when Eratosthenes devised a clever method of estimating its circumference. He realized that if he knew the distance from Alexandria to Syene, he could easily calculate the circumference of Earth. But in those days, it was extremely difficult to determine distance with any accuracy. Some distances between cities were measured by the time it took a camel caravan to travel from one city to the other. But camels have a tendency to wander and to walk at varying speeds. So Eratosthenes hired Bamatis, professional surveyors trained to walk with equal length steps. They found that Syene lies about 5,000 stadia from Alexandria. Eratosthenes then used this to calculate the circumference of the Earth to be about 250,000 stadia. Modern scholars disagree about the length of the stadium used by Eratosthenes. Values between 500 and about 600 feet have been suggested, putting Eratosthenes' calculated circumference between about 24,000 miles and about 29,000 miles. The Earth is now known to measure about 24,900 miles around the equator, slightly less around the poles. Story 40, that dairy cows have to be milked or their udders will burst. Like any other mammal, dairy cows only produce milk when they're pregnant or lactating. The milk is meant for their calf. It's just that we take the calf away so we can have the milk instead. Story 41, people still believe corsets are harmful. Tight lacing is harmful, but a well-made corset that is laced up correctly is just a supportive garment. Corsets were originally just underwear. It surprises me how many people don't know that. Story 42, I'm not sure if it's been thoroughly debunked, but astrology has been way too legitimized in our culture. Your birth date doesn't set your personality level compatibility in stone. Story 43, creationism. Christianity, the absurd idea that a god would become human just to sacrifice himself to himself in order to create a loophole in a rule he created. Story 44, subliminal messages backmasking. No conclusive evidence has ever emerged to suggest that subliminal messages or blackmasking do anything at all. The one person who conducted this particular experiment for advertising admitted to A, faking his results, B, creating bias in viewers by intentionally telling them what they'd see before actually showing the image. Also, not only is it non-functional in advertising, there's no way in it can ever influence behavior, such as those nincompoops who think Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven contains satanic messages in reverse, or that all rock music can make viewers kill themselves through brainwashing. Also, brainwashing your fans into killing themselves is horrible business sense. Story 45, everything regarding virginity, especially the myth that you have to bleed the first time you have. So many women have lost their life due to this. It's sad and makes me angry. Story 46, not sure if this counts, but tomatoes aren't vegetables, they're fruit. In fairness, this is partly true. Tomatoes are fruit, but they're still vegetables. Vegetable is a culinary term, not a botanical one. Fruit is both. I just find it personally really irritating when you get a AskReddit by someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. You never hear anyone trying to say actually pineapples are berries, so why aren't they my mixed berry smoothie? Because they recognize it sounds obnoxious, not smart. Story 47, the Bible never said anything against homosexuality. The quote was mistranslated or altered. The original quote is about pedophilia. Man shall not sleep with another man. Is actually man shall not sleep with a boy. Story 48, 11 wasn't an inside job. Still surprising how many people still claim that something happened. Nope, it's one of the most studied events of the 21st century. We know a lot about it. Story 49, that the full moon means hospitals and ERs will be busier. More police calls, arrests, more births. Many people who work in such places still believe this, yet their own records show it isn't true. Not even more fights at hockey games on full moon nights. Yes, Canadian researchers on that one. Story 50, to know how niche this is, but political science is not a good pre-law course. Every year, at least where I live, there's an avalanche of poli-sci majors applying for entering law school, many of whom chose that degree just because they were planning on going into law. I speak mainly for myself, but I thought political science was the most boring, miserable experience in my college life, and I'm glad I shifted out before I devoted too much time to it. Avoid it unless you really have a genuine interest, passion for the field. Doesn't matter. Almost zero of what you learned, both in skills and stock knowledge, one could really give you an edge. Story 51, generally, anytime the statement starts with the Founding Fathers intended. General, when that is used, it is followed up with zero historical evidence. Story 52, I forgot. The science behind negative ion technology is complete bunk. A lot of the products actually have a radioactive material that's used in it that can be absorbed through the skin through prolonged, where like the bracelets, clothing sheets that can actually damage your health. Also, negative ions isn't a thing. There's a fascinating video on it. Story 53, that the gender wage gap is due to the 77 number is derived from dividing the median income of a woman working full-time by the median income of a man working full-time. Completely ignored our profession. Hours worked full-time, 40 hours. The average man works more hours per week than the average woman or education levels. Edit on top of that, it's illegal as of 1963 to discriminate based on with regards to pay. Story 54, people eat 8 spiders in their sleep over a lifetime. Yeah, like something evolved to crawl into someone's mouth just to die. So many people believe this, lol. Story 55, that stress causes ulcers. They're proven to be caused by a type of bacteria that can be cured with antibiotics. Someone won a Nobel Prize for the discovery. Yet to this day, there are doctors who tell ulcer patients to cure it by reducing stress levels. Story 56, GMOs are bad. Humans have been altering food since we started farming. Do people seriously think foods like melons were always so big and perfect? They were borderline inedible until we altered their growing patterns and environments. Story 57, you only use 10 of your brain and would become superhuman if you used 100. You actually use 100 of your brain. Each section is responsible for controlling different functions of your body. For example, the prefrontal cortex controls thoughts, memory, and behavior. The parietal lobe controls language and touch. The occipital lobe controls visual processing, and the brainstem controls basic functions such as breathing and maintaining your heart rate. Story 58, that soy acts just like the hormone estrogen. The phytoestrogens found in soy aren't actually treated by the body the same way as human estrogen, and everyone, including men, naturally has some level of estrogen. Story 59: Carbs are bad for you. Personal experience from someone who lost 117 pounds. Carbs are not your enemy. The whole keto thing has the highest rebound of any diet because it's not sustainable, and oftentimes the keto articles and people are pushing alternative foods that are loaded in sugar and sodium, which are the real enemies. I eat 300 g of carb a day, and yes, I work out, but I didn't start to lose weight until I severely reduced my sugar intake. Eat your carbs, they're nothing but good for you if you plan on doing keto. Realize it has a horrible rebound for many reasons. Yes, you will lose weight, 80, or so will not keep that weight off. Story 60: that cracking your fingers will give you arthrosis or other bones joints-based problems. It won't. If you do end up having it, then it comes from a very different source, like a form of physical activity you will have been doing for years. Like the Super Smash Bros. Player, Mew2 King, who played so much his hands now starts to hurt, and as a result can't play the character Fox very well anymore, because of how fast-paced and demanding the character is. But that's because he played at a highly competitive level nonstop for leader all years, not because he cracked his joint every once in a while like everyone else. Story 61: that masks won't protect you from COVID-19. Some people still believe that masks won't protect you. It's unbelievable how this misinformation has killed so many people. Story 62, man. Take your pick. Flat Earth. Vaccines causing autism. My favorite one of those is the one that believes the vaccines are autism, as if autism were some tangible disease, instead of just a genetic up spinach are the best for getting iron, and count on a lot of it. In reality, the paper that started this rumor made a typo and added a 0 at the end of the true number. It's actually better to eat lentils if you lack iron. Edit: I had written lenses instead of lentils. Story 63: searing meat, seals, and juices. Not overcooking is the only reliable method to cook a juicy steak. Once a steak is past medium doneness, the perceived juiciness drops pretty quickly. The Culinary Institute of America has a department called the Food and Beverage Institute, SCI-AFBI. They got jokes that studies food myths. This was one of their early studies. Story 64: the whole 95 of the ocean is still unexplored thing. It depends how you define explored. People throw this figure around like 95 of the Earth's ocean surface is just a huge blank spot on the map, or like there's plenty of space for a surviving population of plesiosaurs to live where we just haven't checked. Neither of those things is remotely accurate. Story 65: more of a persistent misunderstanding than a myth. But working OT will never cause you to earn less due to taxes. Tax brackets are marginal. So if your extra hours did happen to move you to a higher tax bracket, only the higher income would be taxed at the higher rate. Story 66: that video games cause violence. May I direct your attention to the fact that the 2 world wars happened before video games, and according to my friend, they don't have video games in Pakistan. And he has a kid who waits outside his house in Pakistan who eats bricks at him whenever he has the chance. Story 67: trickle-down economics. If you give the rich more money, they get more rich. If you give the poor more money, they buy, stimulate the economy, and create jobs due to supply and demand. Story 68: not debunked, but commonly misinterpreted. Mentally ill people are more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. A lot of people misinterpret that to mean mentally ill people are never or only rarely violent. This is usually used to fight against stigmatization of mentally ill people as dangerous, but this is incorrect. It just means that mentally ill people are more likely to be victims than perpetrators. It says nothing about the absolute likelihood of them being a perpetrator in the first place. In reality, mentally ill people are both more likely to be victims of violence and more likely to be perpetrators of violence than non-mentally ill people. Removing stigmatization of mental illness is helpful, but living in a fairy tale land where violence caused by mental illness isn't a problem is not helpful. Story 69: I just had a biology lab that had a diagram of the disproven tongue map that says that you can only taste certain flavors on different parts of your tongue. I'm a senior in college. Story 70: that corsets were perpetuated by the patriarchy to keep women downtrodden, that they were massively uncomfortable, that women had ribs removed to cinch tighter, that corsets were tight-laced every day. So many fashion history myths to unpack.